Hello everybody, welcome back to the new Mindscape. In this video I'm going to talk about spiritual capital and faith-based NGOs. In the previous video I talked about the spiritual benefit that people gain from serving others. Some scholars call this spiritual capital. Spiritual capital is a concept that emerged among some scholars in the past 2 decades. In our capitalist society, we've learned enormously about how to generate material value and how to multiply it. So that is to say that we know a lot about how to accumulate financial capital, as well as how to generate more capital with seed capital. And in sociology, management, and some other fields, there's an increasingly deep understanding of the ideas of capital and value. So a number of concepts of capital have appeared, such as economic capital, human capital, social capital, cultural capital, symbolic capital, and now spiritual capital. These are all different types of so-called capital. That means that different types of value can be accumulated, generated, and converted into other things. So, for example, social capital refers to your social network and connections. Cultural capital refers to your amount of cultural knowledge. Symbolic capital refers to your prestige. So, some scholars have been using the concept of spiritual capital to understand how certain organizations, whether they're businesses, NGOs, or religious groups, try to put their spiritual values into practice to generate even greater value. They try to explore the value created through the application of spirituality, of a spiritual orientation to life. And so I've been doing some research on this in the past years in relation to the use of spiritual capital in NGOs and civil society in Hong Kong. At the core of religious teachings in general, we find teachings of compassion and love, and the encouragement to do good deeds of generosity and of giving to charity. So it's no surprise that we have many charitable organizations that have religious backgrounds. In fact, the origin of charitable organizations in history is religious. It's quite common that we associate religion with charity. Now, this is something that religious groups have been doing for a long time, of helping the poor. So in this research, I tried to understand whether there's anything about the spirituality of these faith-based organizations that makes them different from other kinds of charities. There are all kinds of NGOs and charities. Some of them are religious or have religious backgrounds, while the others are not. So let's assume that there are 2 groups that help homeless people. One is faith-based, while the other one is not. So we'd like to see if there's any difference between the 2 groups. Does spirituality generate any difference in the organizations that are trying to serve society? In our research in Hong Kong, we found 3 types of faith-based organizations. One type is purely religious groups that only serve their own religious community. So these groups don't necessarily serve society or the broader community outside of their own group. And at the other end, there are some organizations that were originally started by religious people, but now they have very little difference from non-religious organizations. So the YMCA is one example. YMCA means the Young Men's Christian Organization, Young Men's Christian Association. Well, now it has a swimming pool, a sports club, a hotel, and so on. It does many good things, but it's really hard to identify anything specifically spiritual about what it does. Now, at the beginning, over 100 years ago, it had the urge and generosity to help young Christian men and to improve their lives, to become more healthy, to acquire knowledge and education, and so it started these sports and educational activities. But gradually these became very institutionalized so that nowadays what they do is hardly different from what you would find in a non-faith-based organization. But the third type of faith-based organizations that I looked at are inspired by a certain kind of faith or spirituality, which leads them to do things for society that are different from both traditional religious organizations as well as from the secular social service organizations or NGOs. So I was curious about what makes them different.